I have the pleasure of introducing Ms. Elizabeth Casas, our Chief Officer. I say of academics, but she's a chief of many things and a brilliant Latina woman. Ms. Casas?
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. We know that student outcomes and student achievement is closely linked to parent involvement, so we appreciate your time with us this morning and learning how to get more involved in education. So I have the honor of introducing Dr. Karen Mapp this morning. Karen Mapp is a senior lecturer on education at Harvard Graduate School of Education and the faculty director of Education Policy and Management Master's Program. Over the past 20 years, Karen's research and practice focus has been on cultivation of partnerships among families, community members, and educators that support student achievement and school improvement. She is a founding member of the District Leaders Network on Family and Community Engagement, is a trustee on the Hyman's Foundation in Boston, Massachusetts, and is on the board of the Institute of Educational Leadership in Washington, D.C. From 2011 and 2013, Karen served as a consultant on family engagement to the United States Department of Education in the Office of Innovation and Improvement. She currently serves as a consultant to the Family Community Engagement Division of Scholastic. Karen served for 18 months as the Deputy Superintendent for Family and Community Engagement for Boston Public Schools. Dr. Mapp holds a doctorate and a master's of education from Harvard University, where she was awarded a Spencer Dissertation Fellowship for her research on how and why families are involved in their children's educational development. Dr. Mapp is the author of numerous publications, including Having Their Say, Parents Describe How and Why They Are Engaged in Their Children's Learning, and Title I Parent Engagement, Lessons from the Past and Recommendations for the Future. It is a great honor and with much pleasure that I introduce Dr. Karen Mapp, who is with us this morning to present on family engagement. Dr. Mapp?
Gracias, Elizabeth. Buenos dias. My Spanish is not very good, so that's the most I will say today because I don't want to embarrass myself. I think it is absolutely a shame that all of us are not bilingual, but that's a whole nother topic for a whole nother day. So I am here today to talk to you about what I have learned over the past close to 25 years now about the power of engaging our families and then the most effective practices that we need to learn and really integrate into our work in order to support our families being, and you're going to hear me say this today many times, co-authors and co-directors of the kind of educational systems that we want for all of our children. What I first would like us to do, for those of you who can access the chat, would you please just say, put your role in? I'd like to say, do a little bit of a who's in the room this morning. So if you have access to the chat, please, if you could just put in your role. We'll see your name that will pop up, but your role would be great just to give me a sense of who some of our participants are here today. And let me just say a few things while you're doing that. We are really excited about this morning's activity. And I want to thank all the support that between Scholastic and the district that work together to make this event possible. So I just want to put out my thanks right now. People are putting in who's in the room. Thank you so much. I see Ruben, I see Katie and Sandra. Let's see, we've got lots of different people with different roles, parent support specialists and parent liaisons. Thank you all so much for your work. We really appreciate you and all that you're doing. So this is wonderful. So as we go on out, when we do some little pauses, I'll go back and take a look. But like I said, it's always nice for me to be able to see who's in the room, since unfortunately we can't be face to face. Although I have gotten very used to doing these sessions on Zoom, and in some ways it allows a lot of people to participate. For those of you who may be combining your work life with your family life, sometimes being able to do these from home is really quite helpful for a lot of folks. Okay, so I am going to share my screen. And if the panelists can give me a thumbs up, let me just see here where everybody went, because I want to be able to see you. Thumbs up if you can see my screen. Great, perfect, excellent. So the title of this talk is Now More Than Ever, Family Engagement is Essential for Student and School Success. And the reason that I'm saying now more than ever is because we really had two events this year that have really caused us to rethink and recalibrate our relationship between home, community, and school. Obviously, the first is the COVID-19 pandemic, but we also have a pandemic in this country of systemic racism. And that all, has come live and in color across our TV screens and in our lives. It's always been, but we've really seen more instances of it this past year. And we've had quite an uprising and people saying enough is enough. And so those two things have really caused a reset and a rethinking about how families can and should be, and in quite frankly, in many cases, already are vitally engaged in their children's education. And how should we be partnering with families to do that work? So my colleague and I, Ayala Bergman, and I have written a piece for the Carnegie Foundation that hopefully will be coming out in a few weeks, where we really lean into some new language around what we really think needs to happen around family engagement. And I'll be discussing some of that today in my presentation. But this is a quote from the Brookings Institute, and they've been doing quite a bit of research on family and community engagement. But this was an article that came out last spring where Rebecca Winthrop says, in March of 2020, the month when almost all the world's countries shut their school doors. And just think about that for a minute. Around the world, schools were closed. This wasn't just a US phenomenon. This is something that affected children around the world. When has that ever happened, when around the globe, schools had to be closed? And what happened around the world is people realized that the only way that we were going to be able to continue any type of schooling was through parents. And so, Pedro Noguera was on a session last week at our National Family and Community Engagement Conference, sponsored by the Institute for Educational Leadership. And he said, parents are our unsung heroes through this pandemic. Without them, there would have been no schooling whatsoever. So in this article, she says that around the globe, engaging parents move quickly to the top of everyone's agenda. And so educators and educational leaders around the globe had to develop new and creative ways of substantially engaging families and parents in their children's learning. So, I have to say that in March of 2020, my email and my phone just went crazy because a lot of school systems around the world who had been resistant to engaging families, all of a sudden were, calling me, Dr. Mapp, help us. And I had to say, and I said, now you all want to come. Now you all want to listen. So I think we've arrived at a moment where at least people are a little bit more open to listening to, what we should be doing around engaging families. And I do think a lot has been learned over the past 14 months. And we'll talk about some of that today as well. So here are my goals for our session. We're first going to talk about what do we mean by family engagement? What is the definition of family engagement? And I'm going to share with you a definition that I like and I use. And we're also going to see what you think about that definition, because I'm gonna show you a little video and get your responses in the chat. So we're gonna do that. I wanna keep this as interactive as I possibly can. The second thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna discuss why family engagement is so important. So what do we know from the research about why family engagement is something that we must integrate into our practice? And then finally, I'm going to talk to you about the new normal around family engagement. So, you know, I often say I get a little worried when I hear people say, oh, we want to go back to normal in schools. Well, normal was not working for a lot of our children and a lot of our families, and quite frankly, for a lot of our educators. So when we think about a new normal around family engagement, what does that look like? And what are the effective practices? So those are our 3 goals for today. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a video. And this is a video, some of you may have seen it if you've been come to my sessions in the past. I really like this video. This is a video that was done pre-pandemic, okay, pre-pandemic. And it is of Jessica Solano, who was the Teacher of the Year a few years back in Florida. And I want you to listen for what she says about how she has shifted the way she thinks about family engagement. In fact, Jessica attended a training that was done by our friend and colleague, Ron Meir, a few years back. And that actually got her thinking. That one session got her thinking very differently about the work that she was doing with her family. So you're going to hear her talk about not only changing her mindset, but changing her practices. And that's what I'm hoping is going to happen today with the time that we're together today. I want to try to get you to think a little bit differently about family engagement, and hopefully that will start you along the path to change some of your practices. What I'm going to have you do is after we watch the video, I'm going to put up a prompt, and I want you to think about the answers, and you can put those and populate those into the chat. You may have to turn your volume up a little bit so that you can hear the video, because I find that sometimes when I do this, the sound is a little muted. So hopefully you can turn up the volume, and interpreters, hopefully Jessica doesn't talk too fast that you'll be able to do the interpretation. Okay, so here we go.
I never had a teacher come to my house before. One time she popped up to two of my friends' houses, and she came with chocolate chip cookies that she made by herself. It's really cool.
Not sure if it works in this way. Hey, going this way? Okay. So Michaela has been keeping track of some of her work this year. So she wants to kind of go through and share that with you and kind of let you see some of her goals for school. So you want to start off with Module 1?
On Module 1, I got a 45. Module 2, I got a 35. Then Module 3, I got a 78.
The reason we do this is because if I just see, oh, it's a 78C, I might think, oh, that's really not that great. But looking at where she came from, that is incredible. I was so proud of you. Ever since I first started teaching, I remember seeing families come in for parent-teacher conferences. Seeing the child next to their family member just made things different. They belonged to someone, and they were someone's whole world. I feel responsible as their teacher to have that open line of communication with their families. I want them to see that. I love you more than I can tell you, and I want to show that in my actions. Hey, Easton. Walking. I used to think family engagement was the same as parent involvement, and I've learned recently that that is not the case. Changing involvement to engagement is huge, because being involved in something does not have a real sense of commitment, where when you're engaged in it, you're taking a stake in this, and it matters to you what the outcome is. Class. Mirror. Out here in the air are all those molecules like we talked about. In order for families to really make an impact on their students' performance, they really need to not only know what is expected of them, but they need to know where their kids are at in meeting that expectation and how to get them there. And I don't think what I was doing in the past with newsletters and having parents come and volunteer in my class was meeting those goals. Technology really helps a lot with engaging families. I've started doing Facebook Live. That has really been powerful in helping those families who especially can't come during the day to sit into a classroom lesson. Welcome, everybody. We've been doing some pretty tricky stuff in math, something called distributive property. It is really easy. I took home some chart paper from school and I wrote down a few problems, just set up my iPad and bam, we're live. It's more than me just telling them I have a daughter. It's more than me just telling them we got a new cat. This is me letting them come into my life and my house. And so it kind of just helps make that connection a little bit stronger. Bye guys, have a great night. Thanks for joining us. See ya. This year for me, I feel like because I put so much stake into family engagement, I know other things have kind of fell by the wayside. You would have to be absolutely perfect to be able to get every single thing right in education. So I think it's okay to understand that we're all growing. Building relationships isn't easy. I have to fight every single day to build that relationship with my husband. I have to work every day to build a relationship with my kids and my coworkers. And so that's something I think I see with my students. I would love for it to be easy to build relationships with them, but nothing worthwhile ever is. I want them to really, truly believe that they are capable of doing whatever they set their mind to, that it's going to take hard work, it's going to take practice. It makes me excited to know that I am not alone in this and that their families are there and we're all helping develop this child who hopefully will be a better person because of this experience.
Okay. So in the chat, what I'd like you to do is to use, to answer these 2 prompts if you can. So what stood out for you in what Jessica said? Was there anything that she said that caught your ear, caught your heart? So you could just put that in the chat. And what did she say that you'll hold on to? Things that you think you really want to hold on to and remember. So while you're doing that, let me just move this down so I can see the chat. So what are some of the things that sort of jumped out at you about what Jessica said? She talked about how she used to think that it was about parent involvement, right? That's the first one. Thank you, Katie, that engagement and involvement are not the same, okay? When we are engaged in something, there's a lot more of a commitment, right? If we're just involved, you know, I always tease about, you know, when you're dating, if you say, well, I'm just involved, you know, that's not really a commitment. But once you say you're engaged to someone, that's really a commitment. Suzanne talks about a lot of time and work are needed to really develop relationships with students and families, but it's worth it. And she says also home visits are great. And yes, they are great if they're done in a way where we see families as our partners. There are home visits and then our home visits, right? The home visits that we like to celebrate are the ones where we're really treating our families as partners. During COVID, I know many districts did what they call curb visits, where teachers and other educators went and met families on the curb, socially distanced, or porch visits, some of the school systems call them, where the families stayed on the porch and the teachers were on the sidewalk, but there was still an opportunity to meet and to talk and to build and either build relationships, and we're going to talk a lot about that today, or continue the relationships between home and school. So let's see, Ruben says, in the reach out to families, the little details will always be remembered, right? The cookies. And also the fact that the daughter was leading the conversation, right? She had a chance to participate. And I always love watching her face. You could see how proud she is and also how proud her mom is. And they're talking about learning. One of the things that, that I've learned from studies that have been done about what's happened with family engagement during the pandemic. There was a study done recently here in Massachusetts of families talking about the return to school. One of the questions was, what is something that's happened during COVID that you want to hold on to? So it goes back to sort of that question that I'm asking, what do you want to hold on to? What did these families say? They said that they want to hold on to the fact that when teachers and other educators called home, it was always about teaching and learning. There were no calls really about discipline, about, oh, what has my child done in school? It was all about, you know, let's talk about learning. Let's talk about the lessons. Let's talk about, are there things that we could do or you could do at home to support the lesson? Families do not want that to go away. And so we'll talk more about the importance of our practices being linked to learning a little later on. So thank you so much for all of you who put things in the chat. Yes, Bernardo says, in a school and families relationship, you've got to build trust and support for each other. Listening and problem solving is the key to success. So there's some wonderful comments here in the chat, and hopefully we'll be able to find a way to capture them because there's some wonderful stuff in here. Okay, so let's continue. So you heard Jessica talk about the difference between the definition of family engagement and parent involvement. So let's talk first about why we say family and not parent. And so when I was deputy superintendent for family and community engagement in Boston, I made it my business to attend a lot of community events so that I could get to know families all over Boston. I happen to live in Roxbury in Boston proper. So I'm surrounded by children and families even in my neighborhood. So, but I tried to go to the different neighborhoods in Boston, attend community events so I could get to know the family members out in the community. And one day I was in the grocery store and a grandmother who had met me at one of the events stopped me. And she said, "You're Dr. Mapp, right?" And I said, "Yes, I am." She said, "I have to tell you something that happened to me this week that was very disturbing." She said, "I went to my granddaughter's parent-teacher conference." She says, "I have full custody of my grandchildren. And this was the first one of the year. And when she sat down with the teacher, and you know, it was one of these things where you get 5 minutes, the teacher said to her, "Oh, I see that you're the grandmother and I appreciate that you are coming, but when is the real parent ever going to show up?" And the grandmother was taken aback because she realized that this person had marginalized her role, did not see, because she wasn't the biological parent, that she didn't count. And so we really pushed very hard with federal, state, and local legislation around the country to make sure we're saying family and parent engagement and not just parent engagement, because a lot of times the word parent isn't very inclusive. And so when we say family, we really mean all adult caregivers and caretakers of our children. Now, we've already talked a little bit about why we say engagement. We'll talk about that some more in a minute. But this is the definition of family engagement that I really like. And this definition comes from the state of Connecticut. And the reason why I like this definition is because of the way it was created, not just the words, but the way it was created. This was an example of co-creation. So families, students, educators, policymakers, all worked together on this definition in Connecticut. Now, did it take a little longer? Yes, but they have a definition that everybody is proud of, that everybody can say they participated and created. And so what they came up with was that family engagement is a full, meaning that families are participating on all different levels, from decisions about curriculum, participating in professional development, not just the small sort of inconsequential ways. Families are engaged in full partnership with educators. Also, everybody is seen as equal. So there's no hierarchies anymore where, those families don't count or those educators don't count. Everybody is seen as equal partners. And the partnership is equitable, meaning that we make sure that we put systems and structures in place that everyone can be engaged, not just those who are privileged or have access to resources. We want to make sure that if we need to go to families and meet them where they are, we do that. So a full, equal, and equitable partnership. Why do we have it? To promote children's learning and development. So we're talking about the whole child here. And we're doing it from birth through college and career. So a full, equal, and equitable partnership. So I like this definition because I think it's very robust. And it really clearly shows us that we're not just talking about these, parent involvement. We're talking about engagement. Here's another author who talks about the difference between involvement and engagement. This is Larry Ferlazzo. He does a lot of writing. He does a lot of blogs. He's a public school teacher. He has been for decades. And he says, a school striving for family involvement leads with its mouth, right? Talks at families. These are places that do things to families and not with families and communities, okay? So they identify the projects, they come up with the needs and goals, and then they tell families, okay, we need you to do X, Y, Z. You don't get to have any feedback. You don't get to co-design. You just do what we tell you to do. I remember one time I was working with a district where me and the superintendent butted heads because when I came there, he said, I want you to help me figure out how to get parents to always agree with what we're doing in the district. I said, you and I are going to fight now because that's not what this is about. So we struggled. He came around, but we struggled a little bit. But a school or a district now thriving for family, parent engagement leads with its ears. Okay, I think one of the people in the chat talked about, this is about knowing how to listen and to hear and to validate, right? So listening to what parents think, dream, and worry about. And this is where I have grown, not seeing families as clients, but seeing families as partners. I will admit that when I came on as deputy superintendent in Boston, I told my staff, I tried to use the metaphor, and it was well-meaning, but it wasn't complete. I tried to use the metaphor of Nordstroms. I don't know how many of you have ever shopped at a Nordstroms, but Nordstroms is known for customer service. They treat you so well in Nordstroms. At least they used to. I've been there in a while, so I don't know how they're doing now, but really great customer service. So I would tell my staff, I want you to treat families like the staff at Nordstroms treat their clients. Now, one day, one of those family members that I met along the way said to me, Dr. Mapp, we don't want to be clients. A client is still a distant relation. That's not a real relationship. That's more involvement. That's not engagement. So we don't want to see our families as clients. We want to see them as partners. Okay, so the distinction there. Yes, we want to treat people with respect, but it's not a client relationship, it's a partnership. So let's talk about what we've learned along the way about the importance of family engagement. And some of you may remember, and I use this a lot to start this section of my talk off, is I remind us of a commercial that was done many years back by, I believe it was Wendy's, where it was an older woman who would come into the shop or drive up to the drive-thru and she would shout out, where's the beef, right? She wanted to know, she wanted to say, hey, if I'm going to spend my hard-earned resources on your product, I expect not to see a little small hockey puck size hamburger. I want to really see some meat in that bun, right? And that she wanted to say, what's going to be the return on my investment? Many of you have heard that term, ROI, return on investment. Basically saying, if I'm going to put in the resources or I'm going to put in the effort, what can I expect in return? And we know now, after many, many decades of research, that there is a high return on investment when we engage in partnerships with our families. So we know that it's not just actually a return on investment when it comes to our students, but we also are seeing incredible impact, positive impact on our families, on our educators, and on our schools. So let's talk about this. So these are the outcomes when it comes to the return on investment for our families. I'm sorry, for our students, okay? So what do we see when families and schools and districts are partners? There's a wonderful array of positive outcomes for our students, from, yes, them getting higher grades and test scores, but these are also students who enroll in some of our higher level programs because there's a good partnership between home and school. That means there's a lot of communication between home and school. Families are able to talk about, here are some particular activities that we think would be great for our kids. Schools are able to share with families, there's this acceleration program or there's this advanced placement program. So you start to see more than just a small number of students being able to gain access to some of those higher level programs, either after school or in school, because there's a lot of communication between home and school, so families know about these programs. We also see for the little ones, these are the children who exhibit higher rates of literacy acquisition, a whole year ahead of their peers if there's no relationship between home and school. That's why we have to start family engagement early. We also see things like, these are the students who come to school more regularly. One of the big bonuses out of family school partnerships is attendance rates go up. And I know that's very important for a lot of districts around the country, because a lot of districts, actually their dollars that flow into the district sometimes are affected by their average attendance rates. So there's a return on investment right there. Kids tend to like school better when there's a strong bonds of trust between home and school. So their social skills are much improved. I have a friend and colleague, Eileen Carver, who co-wrote a book actually with me called Powerful Partnerships. And she talks about how her relationships with her families are the only classroom management strategies she needs. So she makes it her business right in the summer to start making contact with families and telling them how happy she is that their child is in her classroom, and how they can expect that she's going to be calling them to ask them for advice. And then she wants to know, what are some of the things I should know about your child that will help me be the best teacher that I could be. She starts that relationship really, really early on, because she knows it's going to have a powerful impact on how the students see her. When our students see that we as educators build trusting and respectful relationships with families, that has an impact on them, because they see that we are committed to really bonding with them and learning about their families and learning about them in ways that are very special to them. So it has an impact on how they see us in the schools and the classrooms. And these are the kids that graduate and go on to higher education. So there's a lot of return on investment for our students. I'm sure you would agree with that. Now, we also see that there is return on investment in terms of positive outcomes for our families. And I know that we have a lot of people here who work directly with families. And some of you yourselves, this may be your story, where you may have been intimidated by schools, where you may have been a parent who said, no, I don't think that I've got what it takes to be engaged in my children's education. And so I feel more comfortable just preparing my child for school and sending them off to school, not realizing the wonderful potential you had as a parent to really be a partner, So what happens is when the schools do that outreach to our families and build that trust, we start to see families changing their mindset around what Kathy Hoover Dempsey calls their job description, right? Their role construction. They start to say, well, wait a minute, I see that I can really have an impact on my child's learning. The school has shared with me some tips and tools, and I see that my child's doing better. I'd like to do more. And what happens is that some of those families decide that they themselves, they build their confidence, what we call self-efficacy. They start to really see that their engagement is powerful. And maybe they get engaged at the school by being on the school site council or being members of the PTA. They start to advocate for all the children in the school. They see that power to go from helping to support their child to support other children. And then some families get empowered to take on new challenges themselves. Some decide they want to go back to school and get their GED. Some decide they want to become teachers. Some decide that they want to get engaged in voting and participate civically. So we really see a lot of positive shifts when we have that partnership between home and school for the families themselves. What about the educators? We have research that shows that teachers and other professionals in schools don't want to leave schools that have a strong family engagement culture. Now, why is that? Because they feel like it's a family. I can always tell schools that have strong relationships between home and school when I hear families and the people who work in the building talk about, this is a family here at this school. We link arms and we're joined together and we respect each other and we love each other. And so this is a family. And who would want to leave a work culture that was like that? And so that's what we find that, in this case, this was a study of elementary schools in Chicago. The teachers who were at schools that had strong family engagement culture, where they valued families, where they were trained on how to work with families, they said, we're not leaving this school. And that's important for your schools because, a lot of times we see this churn of teachers leaving. And just know that if you have that strong community, teachers want to stay. All of your paras, all of your librarians, the front office staff, the principal, if you have a good principal, they want to stay, okay? That's huge for a district budget, is to have people stay and not leave. Finally, what we see is that strong partnership actually has an impact on the school itself. So this is a study that was done out of Chicago, and the book is called Organizing Schools for Improvement, Lessons from Chicago. What these researchers did was they said, why is it that some schools, no matter what we do, seem to be chronically underperforming, while other schools are able to steadily improve? Now, of course, sometimes in the field of education, what happens is we think it's one answer. Well, it's the school principal or it's the curriculum. But what these researchers found out was that it's actually a recipe. There are 5 main ingredients to this recipe. So I want you all to think about a cake, okay? And so you know that there are main ingredients to every cake. And if you leave out something important, the cake is a disaster, right? Well, it's the same thing with this. In order to improve our schools, there's a recipe. And that recipe has 5 main ingredients. They call them the 5 essential supports. So what are those main ingredients? First of all, yes, the school leader is very, very important. And this is a person who is not afraid to share power, is not afraid to create a nice, strong learning community at the school. What's another ingredient? Another ingredient is that you have to have strong professional capacity among all of the adults in the building. So from the office staff to the librarians to the people who serve food, everybody in the building, your parent liaisons, everybody in the building has to want to learn and grow. What else is another ingredient? You have to have a student-centered learning climate, not an adult-centered learning climate. When I was deputy soup, I could go into a school building and I could tell within probably about 10 minutes by the way I was greeted at the door and how the people I overheard talking about the kids, what's the words that they were using? Were they using asset-based language or deficit-based language about the schools and the community? I'll never forget one school we visited. The assistant principal came to the door as we were entering and stopped us and said, you know, I just want you to realize that the kids that we serve, I don't particularly like that word, that we serve at this school come from broken homes and from families who don't care. And so what you're going to see here is reflective of that. I was mad right from the beginning of the visit. And I told my superintendent who was with me, you need to fire this person, because it was deficit language right from the beginning. That wasn't a student-centered learning climate. And so, you know, this is what you need to have. That's another one of the ingredients. Always asking questions, what's best for the children, not what's best for the adults. Another ingredient, strong instructional guidance, good professional development. And then the last ingredient, parent and community ties, their word back then for family and community engagement. Now, I want you to think about that for a minute. That means that family and community engagement is an essential ingredient to school improvement, not an add-on. Now, think about, if we take the cake metaphor, you know, an add-on would be the sprinkles on top of the cake or the frosting. No, these researchers said family engagement is actually one of the main ingredients of the cake of school improvement. And if you leave it out, you have a disaster. Think about the baking powder. You only use a little bit, but it's an essential ingredient, isn't it? Because without it, the cake doesn't rise. Well, what these researchers are saying is, without family and community engagement, the school will never rise. The students will never rise. So what I want you to think about is, does your district, does your school see family and community engagement as a main ingredient of school and student success? Do you see family engagement as a main ingredient of student and school success? Because that would be a major shift just from today, is I want you to change your mindset around seeing family engagement as an add-on. That is one of the things I think that we really learned from the pandemic. We can no longer see family engagement as an add-on. It is an integral part of our ability to improve our schools. Okay? So let's talk now about what we need to do to shift our practice. So we've talked a little bit about the definition of family engagement. We've talked about what the research says about why family engagement is important. Now we're going to shift and talk about how we actually change our practice and what effective practices are. But I want to pause for a second to see if there's any questions before I move on. You can use the Q&A for your questions, okay? Use the Q&A for your questions. Use the chat from now on today to, if you have additional information you want to share with our community today, or you want to do a shout out to something that you heard, but let's put your questions into the chat. I'm sorry, into the Q&A, all right? So put your questions into the Q&A, and the wonderful folks here are going to monitor the Q&A for us, and they will jump in if they see a question that they want me to answer. Do we have anything as of yet? If not, I'll keep going.
No, we do not.
Okay, all right. Don't be shy.
Oh, one just came in.
Go ahead.
How should we approach key staff that aren't contributing to a positive school environment?
So I would need to know a little bit more about that, but I think that start with the willing and start with people who are on the same, who have the same role as the people who are trying to influence. So for example, if you can pull in a few school leaders who you know are advocates of family engagement, or you think that they are, what we call early adopters, people who would be willing to participate, they are your best bet to try to influence other principals, right? Same thing with teachers. If you can bring some teachers on board who can be advocates and talk about the wonderful return on investment that they've seen in their classes around family engagement, they're the best ones to put in the front to talk to other teachers about this. You see what I'm saying? So a lot of times if people see their peers are doing it and getting great results, they're more likely to warm up to the idea. And don't get frustrated, start small. You're not going to be able to convince everybody all at once. Listen, I've been doing this now for 25 years. And, the pandemic, quite frankly, has really helped me get people to realize how important this is. It's been a forcing function for a lot of people. It took something this drastic to get people to realize that this is really important. So I think we have a bit of a moment here that we can capitalize on. But it takes time sometimes, but people are moved by results. So if you can show them results, have people do testimonials, families talk about, how this relationship with their classroom teachers or with the other folks at the school really has changed them and changed their child. Those are the kinds of stories that get people to sort of shift their mindsets. Okay. All right, so I'm going to move on. And as I said, put your questions into the Q&A section of Zoom, and we will try to periodically check them. And I'll take a pause and we can answer. I will have a full Q&A session at the end of my presentation. Okay. So this is a question that gets asked of me a lot. Dr. Mapp, we've had all of this research on family engagement for decades. What's the problem? Why is it so hard for us to cultivate and sustain these partnerships? We know that they support student achievement. We know that they support school improvement. What's the problem? And that was the question that just got asked. Like, how do we get people who don't seem to understand or seem unwilling? Well, how do we get them to move on this? Well, one of the things that I used to say, so this sort of like Jessica, I used to think, but now I think, the pandemic and the racial reckoning this year has caused me to really think. And I started asking a lot of questions of practitioners, of parent coordinators, parent liaisons, teachers, principals, school counselors, you name it, after school folks. I say, let's do a 5 why root cause analysis to see if we can't really figure out what's going on here. And I used to say that the real reason that we were, running up against a brick wall around family engagement was because people had not been trained on how to do it well. And I still believe that is one variable, but that's not the whole story. Unfortunately, this is really the root cause of why we see so much resistance. If we're really honest and we really look in the mirror and we really interrogate our beliefs, unfortunately, I think that if we really look under the hood, we're going to realize that really at the root cause of this is that we don't value our families, particularly our families who are non-dominant families, who come from different racial and ethnic groups, whose families may have a lower socioeconomic status, families who may have a limited educational attainment, families for whom English isn't their first language, families who come from other countries. Unfortunately, this country looks down and doesn't value those families, which is a huge problem. And so what we have to do is we have to face that. We have to face it. You know, this is a quote from a wonderful book that I love. It's great. I will highly recommend it. It's by Isabel Wilkerson. It's called Caste, The Origins of Our Discontents. And in it, she talks about this caste system that was established here in this country right from its founding. And that, you know, we breathe in, you know, Beverly Tatum talks about the smog of the isms, of racism, of sexism, of classism. We breathe that smog in. It's in our systems and our structures. And even when we have the best of intentions, it affects what we do, how we do it. That's what Isabel Wilkerson is saying. This caste system, you know, she describes it. She says, as we go about our daily lives, caste is the wordless usher in a darkened theater, flashlight cast down in the aisles, guiding us to our assigned seats in a performance. So it's this caste system is moving us into these seats in some ways that we don't even recognize ourselves. The hierarchy of caste is not about feelings or morality. It is about power. Which groups have it and which do not. It's also about resources. Which caste is seen as worthy of them and which are not, who gets to acquire them and who does not. Sound familiar? It is about respect, sort of who has it and who doesn't, authority, and assumptions of competence. Who is accorded these and who is not? This is what we have to wrestle with. We have to wrestle with how this caste system has set in place and set in motion certain systems and policies and mindsets about our families. I hear it come out in our language. You've heard it too. This is something that I took from Ibram Kendi's book, Stamped from the Beginning. Our families often are stamped from the beginning with these mindsets that are deficit mindsets. You hear it in the language, right? So like I told you, when I go into some schools, I listen for the language. And sometimes I have staff come up to me and say, oh, you know, Dr. Mapp, you know, can you help us? Because our families just don't care. You know, we ask them to turn on the Zoom and, you know, they just don't care. They don't value education here in our district. You know, they can't be counted on. We've tried everything. They can't be counted on. You know, they don't understand. They can't understand what we're asking. They won't engage. So this, I call it the don't, can't, won't language. Those are signals to me of a deficit mindset about families, of a caste mindset about our families. So we've got to be willing to talk about this and examine it. You should start with your own mindset. When you think about the families in your schools, what comes to mind? Do you automatically first go to their assets, the wonderful skills and knowledge and resources that they bring? Or do you start off thinking in a negative way? So we got to turn that around. I want you to be thinking about, you know, our families are bilingual. Our families have these wonderful cultural resources. And that's a lot of great stuff that you need to be leveraging. Take the don't, can't, won't language, throw it out. Think about what your families can do, who they are, the wonderful resources that they bring. Okay, that's the beginning to partnerships. That's the beginning to dismantling these old, you know, funky, normal systems and structures, because they're set up to treat families as spectators, to push them to the outside, versus seeing them as full team members and co-creators and designers. So that's a shift that we need to make. And I think that has happened somewhat with the pandemic because we had to engage families as co-creators and co-designers, whether we liked it or not. So this is where we want to go. So what's the way forward? How do we change? How do we start to recalibrate, reimagine what we do around family engagement? This is a great quote, and there have been several that have come out over the past 14 months from educators across the spectrum. So this is a school, the chancellor, the school superintendent in Baltimore. Her name is Sonia Santelises. She went to Harvard. She's one of my colleagues and friends. And she wrote a wonderful op-ed in Ed Week where she says, you know, we have a choice to make about this crisis. As educators, we can make our new normal better than the old, engaging parents as the partners that they are. Or we can wait for parents to lose whatever faith in us remains. They cannot unsee what they have witnessed so vividly in their own living rooms. So, you know, we were, for all intents and purposes, doing home visits every day during the pandemic. We were coming into our families' homes, right? And our families were seeing our practice. And in some cases, they were seeing us struggle, which was fine, because sometimes families says, you know, I think I have an idea I know how my child responds. Let me share that with you. So we had an opportunity to really do some cross-learning. Here's another quote from an educator here in Massachusetts. Her name is Nikki Barnes. She's the executive director of KIPP, Massachusetts. She's really an advocate for family engagements. And she says, this past year, our families have become more than partners. So she's saying we're even going to beyond partners, right? Again, she uses that co-idea. They have become co-authors of our educational journey. This is the new normal for our schools. And I am sure for so many others around the country. Okay? New normal around family engagement. So what do we mean by this new normal? And I told you, I've been doing a lot of thinking and reflecting and interrogating my own beliefs. I've been saying, okay, what do I need to say to people now about these partnerships? What is this new normal? And so what I'm saying now, and I'm again in that piece that will be coming out from Carnegie, we're talking about your family engagement practice now has to be three things. Liberatory. Okay, for those of you who've read Paulo Freire, we're talking about liberatory practice here. Free of dominance. No more of this seeing families as less than. What else? It needs to be solidarity driven. Again, in unison, in union, and in fellowship. Co-authors, co-partners. Finally, equity focused. Fair and just practice. I believe that family engagement is an equity strategy. So we're looking for our family engagement now in this new normal. We want to see it as liberatory, solidarity driven, and equity focused. That's our goal. That's our North Star. How do we get there? First of all, we got to recognize what we learned during the pandemic. What did we learn? Here are some things that I hear over and over and over again, and you heard it in some of the quotes I just read. We've learned that, first of all, and I've been saying this for a long time. Some of you who've known me long, you know I've been saying this. I'm finally excited that people are finally getting it. Relationships matter. In fact, we have heard stories, and Jenny Brasington and I did a webinar series last spring and summer, because we said, you know, we want to hear stories coming out of the pandemic for how schools have pivoted. How are they doing family engagement now? And what we heard were stories from the schools and districts that had already started to build these trusting and respectful relationships with families. They found it much easier to pivot. during the pandemic. So the ones that already prioritized partnerships and relationship building, they said, Dr. Mapp, we were able to pivot, our families chipped in, okay? They also reported smoother transitions. So, you know, a lot of our districts went back and forth from fully virtual to hybrid to back to fully virtual. And they found that when those things happened, their families were right with them because they had already established these partnerships. A lot of places have realized, particularly those places that had not had those kinds of partnerships, they realized they needed to build those relationships, but they also discovered what a lot of us have already known: families know more, they understand more, and they do more than educators were giving them credit for before the pandemic. So they saw, you know, a lot of that don't, can't, won't mindset started to dissolve because they saw families really chipping in, really understanding the lesson planning, really understanding how they could bring, you know, sort of culture and nature into the learning. And then finally, it really sort of underscored, as I said, my phone started ringing off the hook. We need training on how to really do these partnerships well. We now realize that this is really important. Help us figure out how to do it. So many of you know that I authored something called the Dual Capacity Framework for Family School Partnerships. The first version was in about 2014. You'll see a slide next where I describe that. But you know, this is a new version. This is version 2. And I did get a lot of calls during the pandemic. And people said to me, so Dr. Mapp, are you going to change the framework again to meet this moment of the pandemic? And I said, you know what? Actually, it's the other way around. The moment has met the framework, because the framework was defining effective practices for districts and schools around the world, but people were resisting. People didn't want to lean into relationships. People didn't want to really build in partnerships that were culturally responsive and respectful. People were resistant. The framework had laid the path. So now the moment has met the framework. And so the framework, again, the first one came out in 2014, second one, 2019. The shift in the framework was really based on people like you all here today telling me, well, you know, Dr. Mapp, I think that the old framework could use this or that. So I redesigned it. It's a compass showing you the way towards effective partnership that's liberatory, solidarity driven, and equity focused. So the framework is providing you with the blueprint for how to get there. So this is the full framework. So I'm not going to have time to go through the entire framework, but we're going to hit on the key points today. Okay. So it's laid out similar to a logic model where we start out with the challenges. We move through to the sort of the inputs, like what do we need to do differently? And then we start to talk about the outcomes. So let's start talking about a little bit about the challenges. Now, I've talked to you a little bit about this already. So as educators, and when I say educators, I mean everybody who's a practitioner. So not just teachers, everybody who's here today that has a role. What has happened is that many of us have not seen examples of brilliant and effective family engagement. And so because of that, and because we received minimal training, you know, then we start to develop these mindsets. Well, family engagement is that add-on, right? We don't really need it when we're talking about instruction, or we don't really need it when we're talking about SEL. We don't need it. It's an add-on. We don't understand that it is one of those essential ingredients to school improvement, right? But the other problem is that we start to develop those don't, can't, won't mindsets. We develop those deficit-based mindsets about our families because we've not been trained and because we have not seen examples of partnership, good, effective partnership. Now on the side of the families, same thing. They haven't in many cases seen great examples of family engagement. In fact, many of them have seen pretty awful ones that have left them traumatized. One of my colleagues and friends, Sue Hong, who teaches at Wellesley, she's a researcher. She does a lot of beautiful research on family engagement. She wrote this great book called Natural Allies. And she talks about how some of our families are experiencing generational disrespect from institutions like our schools. And then all of a sudden we expect with one invite or one tweet that they're going to come tumbling into our buildings and really want to be with us. No, we've got to do a lot to dismantle all of that trauma that our families may have experienced when they were in school, or, again, we've had families say, that first phone call, why is it always got to be about something negative? And then we wonder why they don't want to pick up the phone or they don't want to answer our texts. They may not feel invited in. Do we really welcome our families to be engaged with us? Or do we push them away right from the beginning? And then finally, they may feel that they've been disrespected, unheard, not listening, those places that talk at families, do things to them and not with them, or unvalued. So these are the things that we have to work on. Now, how do we do that? We shift the conditions. So this is a wonderful article by an organization called FSG. This is an article that's actually written for foundations, for program officers, but I love it because it talks about how do we shift behavior? How do we get people to practice things differently? They say, well, you have to shift the conditions in order to have any kind of systems change. So the conditions that are holding those problems in place, you've got to change them up. You've got to shift them. And that's the logic that we use for this next section of the framework, which talks about what are the essential conditions that we need to incorporate into our practice. My friend and colleague, Michelle Brooks, says family engagement is not a program. Family engagement is a practice. And I firmly believe that we cannot say that we are proficient at anything that we do in our roles in education unless we are proficient at family engagement. It's part of our practice. So if we see it as part of our practice, what does our practice have to look like? So we have two sets of these conditions. First are the process conditions. This is the things that you can start to work on to do differently in your own practice. And the organizational conditions. These are the things that we need to have set up in our districts and in our programs to support the process conditions. So the organizational conditions really are the infrastructure that has to be set up, those systems and structures that have to change to support the practice. So let's talk a little bit about these process conditions. The first one, again, and I said, what do we learn from the pandemic? That underscores what was always in the framework, is that relationships matter. The first thing that you have to focus on, particularly next year when we started reopening all of our schools, you've got to make sure you've built relationships of trust and respect with your families. We call it relational trust. And this is trust that's built on different components of relational trust. These are the components that you have to focus on cultivating with your families. Relational trust, 4 components of it. First of all, respect. Second of all, competence. Third, integrity. And fourth, personal regard. So let's talk about this. My colleague that I mentioned to you, Eyal Bergman, he came up with this sort of checklist of questions that he asks himself. He was the head of family and community engagement for the El Cajon district in California. He became one of our doctoral students, just graduated a few weeks ago. And so he says he asks himself these questions. So in terms of building respect with families, he asks himself, am I seeking input and really listening carefully to what all, not just some, what all of my families have to say? Because when we feel heard and seen, that's when we feel respected. When we feel dismissed, we feel disrespected, right? So am I seeking input, and am I really listening to what my families have to say? And do I create systems and structures where I can listen to my families? In terms of competence, am I demonstrating that I'm a competent person in terms of my role? But also, am I signaling to families that I see them as competent caretakers and caregivers to their children? And I know there's some circumstances where we feel that, families are struggling with that. But we at least have to, in the beginning, see them as that, and then provide them with the supports when they're struggling. In terms of integrity, do I keep my word with families? I know that sometimes we're tempted to just say anything. We've got that particular family member who may be always calling, and you may want to just say anything. Don't do that, because our families remember. We remember. So do we keep our word? And then finally, do we see our families basically as human beings? There's a lot of objectifying of groups these days, putting people in boxes and labeling them and seeing them as objects. You got to remember, all of those folks have a heart. They have feelings. We have to see them as whole people. So these are the 4 pieces that we have to really concentrate on and not skip over. Because unfortunately, what I see is a lot of times I will work with districts and they go right to the interventions. They go right to the activities. And those activities do not have a relationship building component to them. So for example, they'll say, oh, we started doing this wonderful, Zoom family night. And so we just invited all our families. I said, well, did you call the families first and welcome them and ask them how they were doing? And because then when only 2 people showed up, what did they say? Oh, parents don't care. Well, they didn't take the time to build those relationships of trust. You've got to start with that. Don't skip that step, because if you skip that step, you're going to find that your interventions are not going to be effective. You also, again, want to make sure that your family engagement practices are actually linked to learning and development. Like I said, this is what the family said. Oh, we're so excited that now the phone calls are about learning and not just about critiquing our child. So you want to weave in, families really want to know, what is my child supposed to know and be able to do? What are some tips that you can share, right? You want to make sure, again, you see your families through an asset-based lens. They have expertise. It goes without saying, you want your practices to be culturally responsive and respectful to families. So, if you're doing something, make sure that, you honor the lived experiences and the cultures and the languages of your families. Collaborative basically means that co-authorship, co-creation. And then finally, you want your practices to be interactive. I know that's hard on the Zoom platform. Today, I would love to be able to do breakouts and things like that, but because of the technology, we can't. But I try, telling you to put things in the chat and have you do Q&A. If we want to change our practice, we have to practice the new practice, right? We often tell people, oh, go out and do it, and we don't give them a chance to practice it. So that's the only way we get better at something, is if we practice it. So that's where the interactive component comes in. So I mentioned to you the organizational conditions. This is where our systems and structures have to support the work. One of my colleagues, the late, great Richard Elmore, used to always say to us in class, for every unit of change that you expect to see, you have to provide an equal unit of support. Meaning that if we expect to see these changes in our schools and our programs, we've got to provide that support. And with all of the resources that are coming down from the federal government right now, I would hope that we are going to target some of those resources to building the capacity of our educators and our practitioners. Because what often happens, and it even is in the language of the ESRA legislation, a lot of times we only focus on the families, building their capacity, right? We've got to make sure, that's why this is the dual capacity building framework. So we have to see family engagement as systemic, embraced by all the leadership across the organization. So we have to build their capacity, train them. Family engagement has to be integrated across all of our systems and strategies, embedded in everything. I saw an incredible presentation last week by the School District of Philadelphia showing how they have embedded, in fact, their instructional team from their chief academic office were the ones that did the presentation on family engagement and talked about how they've integrated family engagement into their induction of new teachers. They've integrated family engagement into their in-service programs, right? They've also integrated family engagement into their hiring. So right from the beginning of the process, hiring to induction to in-service professional development, all of that has family engagement integrated into it. This is what we mean. It's in all strategies, in your technology strategies. And then finally, again, we make a commitment through resources. And resources sometimes isn't just money, it's time. Do we give our educators the time to build partnerships with families? Can we change, for example, our professional development so that perhaps there's time that's dedicated for our educators and others to reach out to families? So if we're serious about it, we'll see it in the bottom line. We'll see family engagement on our budget sheets, but we'll also see it in the way that we put together our schedules. We've got to give people time to do this work. When we start to integrate the process conditions and the organizational conditions into our work, we start then to see changes, right? We see changes in our families, we see changes in all of our practitioners, and the way we see them change is in something we call the 4 C's. So, you know, a lot of times we throw out that term, oh, we want to build capacity. Well, what do we mean by capacity? So one of my colleagues, Monica Higgins, has broken it down for us. She says, capacity can come in 4 forms. So first of all, we're going to see that our capabilities increase, right? We're going to learn new things. We're going to be able to do new things based on our knowledge. So our families learn new things. We as educators learn new things, and we're learning from each other. And that learning from each other builds the next capacity, which is our connections. Our social networks start to increase. We know more people. We have relationships with folks. We have these wonderful back and forth where we're sharing knowledge. Another way that we change in terms of building our capacity is that whole thing around mindsets, our cognition. How we see each other begins to change when we work together. And then finally, our confidence. We start to build more confidence. We have our educators who are more confident in being able to do work with families. They're no longer seeing families through a deficit-based lens. Our families don't have to be intimidated anymore by school because we're doing these things together. They're seeing the positive feedback and relationship that's coming from the school to home. So when that happens, now we're chugging along and we're working together. And so this piece of the framework, we're really seeing those outcomes, right? We're seeing how our educators and our families are now working together. They fit together nicely like a puzzle piece. They're working together. We've got the educators that understand that they can connect family engagement and should to all learning and development. Our families are now co-creators. And all that then is in service of the final aspect, that return on investment. That is effective partnerships that support student and school improvement. So what we're going to do now is we're going to see another video of a teacher. Her name is Annie Shaw, and she's a teacher who we interviewed during the summer webinar series that we did. And I want you to listen to her talk about how she sees her families. I want you to listen for aspects of those process conditions, the relational part, right? The linking families to learning, seeing families through an asset-based lens. Does she see families through an asset-based lens or a deficit-based lens? What does she say that gives you clues to how she sees her families? Is she aware of this cultural responsiveness and respect that families need and want? How's she collaborating with families? And it might be difficult to see here, but what are some ways that she does things that are interactive with her families? So I'm going to show you this video. Again, it may come through a little soft, so you may have to turn up your volume a little bit. But I want you to try to notice some of the things in the framework that I talked about. Okay, and then I'm going to close out and we're going to open it up for some Q&A. All right. Annie, as a teacher, I certainly want to give you an opportunity to talk about, and you know, we usually have a lot of teachers on the call to talk about, you know, why are you so committed to engaging with families, and what do you get out of it? You know, sometimes we hear teachers say, you know, oh, this is one more thing to put on my plate. Oh, you know, this is going to be too much, and I'm already doing all these things already. We get a lot of that sometimes as pushback, and I totally get it because teachers are doing a lot. But why is this important to you? What does it offer you as a teacher?
Yeah, I mean, there are so many reasons that family engagement is important to me. And the first one is that families are the experts on their child. And I'm committed to knowing my students deeply. I'm committed to sparking their curiosity and having them be intellectually engaged. And partnerships with families, I believe, really make that possible. Families are what give us insight into a child's passions, into their strengths, into their areas of growth, and into like the social and emotional health of that child. So to me, that's baseline. Another reason family engagement is so important to me is because there's so much expertise among the families. So in a normal school year, I try to get as many experts into the classroom as possible. And as a teacher of Black and Brown students, I think it's really like vital for us to widen this idea of who the teacher is and who the experts are. And we need more people of color in front of our students. We need more men in front of our students. I teach at the elementary level. And so at the beginning of every year, I take an inventory and I ask families, like, what can you come in and teach us this year? What can you share with us? And, you know, with the assumption that we're going to go partially remote or fully remote this year, I actually think that there are more opportunities than ever to bring those experts and all the families into our classroom space, because it's kind of easier in some ways right now. And then Karen, you asked, like, what does it do for me? And there certainly is a personal component to it. One of the things that I love about working with young people is it is authentic. Kids are real. So they don't hide their joys, they don't hide their frustrations, they don't hide their anger. And I like that. I like being in a real kind of raw space every day. And it feeds me to have those kind of intense relationships with kids. And I like having those relationships with families too. It honestly, it feeds me as a human to be able to interact with adults that way. And I think that when students and teachers and parents are in partnership and interacting authentically, students feel that viscerally. And it provides emotional support for them, and it provides like spiritual support as well. And I think that when we do that, and when our students witness that, we're saying to our students, we've got you, we love you, and you know, we're all on your team.
Annie, could you just say just a little bit, just one more thing I want to add in to follow up. So what would you say to teachers who are reticent about engaging with families? I mean, you said a lot about how it fills you up, right? You said it feeds me as a human. I love that. But are there a couple of other tidbits for those people who might still be a little hesitant about this that you can share?
Yeah, I think that in the long run, deep family relationships make the job easier and make the job more joyful. Teaching is so hard. It is so exhausting. And there is going to be a point in every school year where we're going to have some kind of difficult conversation with a parent. And when we have done the foundational work of building that relationship, those conversations are not difficult. You know, they're saying, hey, I'm concerned about this. Are you noticing this? Rather than making a phone call that I feel nervous about, that the parent doesn't want to receive. It's, to me, that work of building that relationship, that's like the first 2 months of school. And that first 2 months of school helps you for the rest of the school year. So to me, I just think it pays off so much to have those relationships from the beginning.
Okay. So in the chat again, if you could just jot in there, basically, you know, what did you hear from Annie that reminded you of what I just talked about with the framework? Okay, so again, did you hear her talk about families as assets? Did you hear her talk about building relationships? What are some of the things that struck you about what Annie said? Because this was actually during the pandemic. You know, she was teaching remotely, and obviously she learned so much. So Nancy says that, you know, family engagement makes things easier, right? She feels like, I love when she said, you know, it feeds me as a human. What were some of the other things that maybe she said that struck you? But, you know, Annie is one of these educators that really believes deeply in family engagement, relationships, yep. Viewing the family's parents as experts. Yep, thank you, Deanna. Heather says she could not do her job without parent-student engagement, but building trust is essential. Yep, building relationships is the foundation to making her teaching easier. That's the thing that I find, that one of the reasons I always like to play this video and the video of Jessica is because I, again, think that in many cases, our educators, our practitioners on all levels have been very skeptical and somewhat downright fearful of building relationships with families. They think that it's going to be too hard. A lot of people will say, well, you know, I've already got a lot on my plate. Why should I add this in? And you can hear from Annie, she says it's an integral part of her practice, and it actually makes her job easier. And why wouldn't we want to build something into our practice that would make our job more fulfilling, more enjoyable, and easier? And so Annie is actually featured in the book that I mentioned to you by Sue Hung called Natural Allies. And she and other teachers in the book talk about the power of engaging families and what they've learned from engaging families. So what I want to do now is open it up for Q&A, but I do want to say a few things first before I do that. I did see something in the chat, a question about resources and money. One of the things I hope that you all will do if you haven't already, and I'll have to try to find access to the website, but there is a website that shows you, anybody who looks it up, how much money is coming to your school district. And if anybody knows that, that link, if you could put it in the chat, how much money is coming to your district as a result of the ARP ESSER funds that have been designated by the Biden administration, the federal government. You should know how much money that is. Most school districts around the country are getting more money than they've ever had in decades to support the return to school. There is a provision in there for family engagement programming. And so the resources are there. So you all should be investigating that. And look, there's some said 155 million. So that's a lot of money. And so you should be, thank you. People are putting information in the chat. You know, all your families and all your communities need to be aware of this. And your districts were supposed to engage with families on how to use that money because their plans were supposed to be submitted on June 7th. So, but you can still have input. You can still, you know, go to those school committee meetings and ask questions about how is this money being spent. But again, you know, I've been telling districts, I don't want to hear for the next 3 years, I don't want you telling me you don't have money, because the fact of the matter is that you do. And so we need to be pushing. This is where we need to be co-creating and co-authoring how that money is to be used. So we have money now for professional development for our staffs. We have money to do some more robust things around family engagement. Okay. Most districts, to get family input, we're doing surveys. That's better than nothing. I see that that was put in the chat. But you still want to ask ongoing questions about how is this money being spent? Some of it being spent, it's a portion of it is supposed to be designated for family and parent engagement. So start asking questions and making suggestions about how that money can be used. So I'm going to stop sharing, but what questions do you have? Why is it saying new share? I don't understand that. Let's close that out. Here we go, stop share. There we go. So we have about 10 minutes left. What questions do you have?
So Dr. Matt, we have a question from one of our Board of Trustees, Lynn Boswell. And her question is, do you know of districts that are doing especially good work to engage families in ERSA decisions?
Philadelphia, Baltimore, Richmond, Virginia, Cleveland, Ohio. Jenny, any others that you can think of? DeKalb County, Georgia. If any of you signed up for the Family and Community Engagement Conference that was last week, you still will have access to some of those wonderful presentations that were done by those districts. And a lot of them talked about how do they do co-creation. Now, I know my colleague Ayala Bergman is going to be joining you all in August because I will be on vacation in August. And so I wasn't able to come back. But I'm sure he will talk to you about the co-creation initiative that he led in Chelsea, Massachusetts, where they did this whole co-design project. And actually, one of my colleagues, her name is Anne Ishimaro, out of the University of Washington, has done a lot of work around helping districts to set up the kind of strategies to do co-design. But Ayala will be able to talk about this. And it's wonderful work, but these are districts who have very intentionally set up, you know, they've gone into parks They've gone into the prisons. They've done this to ask families, talk about what you see, what you think we need. Because the families know the communities, they know their kids. So they use their input to design the proposals. So those are some districts that I would look up because they're doing wonderful, wonderful work around family engagement on many, many, many levels.
So we had another question, Dr. Mapp, and also a comment. It says, if a campus leadership holds all the power and has a definite deficit mindset, how can the community move forward? There is a major imbalance of power on some campuses. If the leader is laser focused on grades, critics, without acknowledgement of family engagement, it can be difficult to break through and get engagement training / events approved.
Yeah, those, I will say that those are tough situations, but I think if families and students organize, and I've always learned you start with honey first, and you may organize a meeting with the school leadership and say, we're really interested in being, more engaged, and we think it would be good for the school. And here are some particular programs, find out what it is that makes that person tick. So I'll give you an example. In Chicago, my friend Sue Hong that I mentioned to you before, she did a study of the Logan Square Community Initiative. And what the organizers found out was that teachers were really concerned about the issue of overcrowding in their classrooms. So what they did was that they partnered with teachers to work hard on getting new funding so that more professionals could be hired in the school to reduce the class size. Now, what that did was that because the families worked with the teachers, they built that partnership. So it might be to find out, like, okay, if that particular school leader is focused on grades and test scores, maybe we go to that school leader and we say, we think we have a family engagement strategy that might actually help increase our grades and test scores. Here's an initiative that we propose. And, maybe work on a pilot or something like that, where that leader starts to see, wait a minute, families are really integral to this work. So you can start that way, or you can start with a more, intentional focus on, raising awareness and being a little bit more forceful, but you have to do it as a collective. It's very difficult if you only have a few individuals speaking up about this. This is where, organizing to say, this is what we want. We want you to recognize parent power. It may be to the point where you've tried some of these other things already, but this is where working together as a team, as a group, really is what moves the needle. Again, doing this with just one or two people is going to be very, very difficult. Can you organize families to, as a group, as a collective, say, this is what we need and this is what we want?
Thank you. We have another question. The question is, Dr. Mapp, do you have experience working with the community schools model? If so, how do you see the model affecting a school's family engagement?
I will tell you that just because a school is a community school does not always necessarily mean that they're using effective practices around family engagement. So it's not a given that just because a school is a community school. So let me give you an example. There's a difference between a community school that sees families through a deficit-based lens and a community school that sees families through an asset-based lens. I've been to community schools who say, okay, well, we have to provide, first of all, they don't ask families what supports they need, right? They look at the demographics, they may look at some of the numbers and they say, okay, these families need this type of intervention, this type of intervention, this type of intervention. They need mental health services, they need this. Whereas if they really ask the families, they might say, well, we really could use help with financial literacy. We would like to get our GED. We would like some help with maybe languages. They never ask the families. They look at the statistics And they craft the services at the school around the statistics, not co-designed with families. And then that's their mindset. Well, we're a full service community school because we have this, this, and this, and we open up, but they still see families and kids through a deficit-based lens. The kind of community school that we like are ones that adopt that new normal practice, liberatory, solidarity-driven, and equity-focused. That's a true community school, right? So again, I don't want us to assume that just because some place is labeled a community school, that it's necessarily one that embraces family engagement. We still have to work on they have, I think they may be more open to it because of the design of being there to, provide supports and a place, but is it a reciprocal relationship? Are families co-designing that community school? That's the first question that I asked. I had a guy call me one time. He said, "Oh, Dr. Mapp, I'm going to be the principal of a community school, and our vision is around family engagement." I said, "Great." I said, "Tell me how many families are on your design team for your new community school?" Crickets, silence. I said, "Hello?" He said, we don't have any family members on our design team." Then I said, "Well, what about your proposal? Like, where is family engagement in the proposal? Like, how are you gonna sustain engagement? What does it say in your proposal?" Crickets. Okay. I said, "Darling, your community school can't have family engagement as a vision because you don't have any strategies and supports. Basically, your actions don't match your words. Your theory of family engagement isn't matched by what you're doing." So, I know that's maybe a long answer to the question, but I think you see where I'm coming from. We got to make sure that all of our community schools embrace the kind of practice that I'm talking about, that new normal.
We have another question. What are your thoughts about the effectiveness of neighborhood walks by school staff in an effort to connect with families? This has been an initiative in our district, especially to increase enrollment.
Well, are they just walking, or are they walking and talking and trying to build relationships? Because, I've seen some of these neighborhood walks where it's like a tour, like they're tourists, and, looking at people, and that's not effective. The neighborhood walk has to be about building relationships. So are there opportunities where people will go in and talk to folks, sit down, share stories, get to know people? That's what that's got to be. But to have 30, 40 people, we did this with my students, but we broke people up into groups of 3. And they had to spend 2 hours in the neighborhood, going into the shops, introducing themselves, asking people, doing them more like one-on-ones in organizing. And if those of you who know how to do a one-on-one where you're really going to learn about the community and learn about families, that's what I think would be important. But if it's just like a tour, going through and, just observing and not engaging, then that's worse, because then people see you coming through their neighborhood and say, "Well, and you don't even talk to the people?" That makes no sense. That's worse. Got to build relationships. If you have a next door neighbor who moves into your community and you want to build relationship with them, are you going to just walk by their house and wave? You're going to ring the doorbell, welcome to the community. You might bring them something, anything you need. If you need information, and I have 3 kids too, and that's how you build relationships. You don't just do a drive-by. Well, I see that we're at the end. It's 11:15, 17. I don't want to keep people, at least in this portion of our time together today. I do want to encourage you. I'm going to share my screen one more time, because what I'd like to do is encourage you to sign up for my Twitter. That's my Twitter handle. The reason why I'm saying that is because any resources that, oh wait, I didn't share my screen. There we go. Any resources that I come across around family engagement, I do put them on my Twitter site. I don't engage, I don't put a lot of any political or animals, no bunnies, no menus, none of that. It's all it's all about family engagement. So I don't, it may be, you know, time passes before I actually post something, but I post things, like I said, articles that I think would be useful for people's studies, things like that. So if you're interested, if there's a conference coming up, I post the link to a conference. So it's mainly about continuously providing you with resources. So I encourage you to sign up if you're interested in that. Okay, anything else?
No, just gracias, Dr. Mapp. It's always such a gift to, you know, be in your sharing space with you and just listening to your words of wisdom and just, you know, calling us to action as a district and me as an individual as well. And just really being mindful of our mindset, you know, that we have when we see our families and we interact with our families. And I'm so excited that we might have the opportunity to bring you back in the fall. And just excited, you know, we'll continue working with scholastics to create more opportunities, to create learning opportunities for our families and our, you know, learning community and community partners. And so to everyone who's here today and those of you who are on Facebook, muchas gracias. Always a pleasure to be in community with all of you and listening and learning together. I think that that's how we create change. I invite you to also join us tonight in our evening workshop that we will be having. So muchas gracias, Dr. Mapp, and we need blessings to you.
Gracias, gracias. I really enjoy, you know how much I enjoy Austin and being with you guys. I can't wait to be able to come back and see you all in person. So hopefully we'll be doing that very soon. And thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, everyone. Chao, nos vemos a la tarde.